Hello, very beautiful community. We're going to react to AOC being asked at Munich about whether she would go to war with China. So this is going to be a reaction chat that's about self-development for our politicians, what kind of politicians we need, what kind of qualities they need to have to keep our democracies on the road over the coming decade and more. But also it'll be a chat about how we understand communication in the age of populism and how one adopts or sometimes skirts with ambiguity political positions. So the way AOC spoke at Munich suggests that she is running. She spoke in a powerful way about the importance of tackling inequality. And here she is talking about foreign policy, and she got into trouble with this answer, and that's been an answer that's gone a little bit viral because she hesitated a lot. So we'll watch, and then we'll really informatively and constructively react. Let's rock and roll.
Would and should the U.S. actually commit U.S. troops to defend Taiwan if China were to move?
You know, I think that this is such a, you know, I think that this is a, this is of course a very long-standing policy of the United States. And I think what we are hoping for is that we want to make sure that we never get to that point. And we want to make sure that we are moving in all of our economic research and our global positions to avoid any such confrontation and for that question to even arise.
So the second part of AOC's answer is better, but let's think about what's going on, except the banal truth that she wasn't prepared for that question. She struggled at the beginning. And that's exactly what you do when you ask the question and you know that the answer you've got falls below the standards of the answer you would have for other questions, but you still got, no, you got some kind of answer. You're wondering, well, gosh, what should I do here? So the first thing that's really important to understand, and we don't understand it, and our political representatives don't understand it, it's very important that you understand it, because in your interactions with your political representatives, wherever you are in the world, it's important to project that you have this grasped, so that politicians can feel safe about the fact that you've got this grasped. So what is it? The misconception is that you've got to give simplistic answers in the age of populism. And that's a terrible mistake. In the age of populism, you have to give direct answers, transparent answers, authentic answers, perhaps decisive answers. But you don't have to give simplistic answers. In fact, very often, a great way to regain trust is to tell citizens, come in, take a look. This is ambiguous. It's not clear, but I'm going to show it to you transparently. So you don't feel that there's anything here that's outside your range of vision being hidden from you. Right. Now, my great public intellectual colleague in the UK, John Gray, uses the term populism in a completely legitimate way, but different to the way I use it. John's usage is to say that populism is a backlash that technocratic centrist elites are receiving for misguided policies they've implemented over decades, which left the citizens feeling fed up, generating a legitimacy crisis. That's entirely reasonable and entirely compatible with my own preferred usage. And my own preferred usage is specifically about public discourse bridging, moving toward private sentiment. Politics talk, where politicians engage with one another as human beings whose relations are mediated by institutions they share, suddenly begin to talk more like they're at the kitchen table. And that's not just something they are doing, it's a product of an historical moment whereby talking like you're at the kitchen table pays in politics, and not talking like you're at the kitchen table, tendentiously, there are always exceptions, is more prohibitive than it was before. This is part of a general slide that occurs really in any complex modern society. So I grew up in the USSR. And in the USSR, we had the opposite, where private discourse was moved to align with where private sentiment, and by extension private discourse, was moved to align with public discourse. And the intention was that public discourse should eat up private sentiment. Right? Today, in the West, we have a problem whereby private sentiment is trying to eat up public discourse, and the solution is that we should partly let it and partly not. And that's part of a general principle about this, that public discourse and private sentiment should not get too close to one another, but should also not be too far from one another. But the answer to the question of where exactly that balance should be is contingent. There is no generalization you can make across different historical moments about where this should be. So it's part of kitchen table talk, constructive kitchen table talk, part of public discourse in a positive way coming to resemble kitchen table talk, that you've got to be more direct, that you've got to be more transparent. But just because we're talking at the kitchen table doesn't mean we can't be complex. I mean, look at us now. I'm sitting in bed, right? As you know, I haven't been able to stand for a single second since April the 24th, 2025, which means it's possible but extremely hard for me to record a video in my wheelchair in the other room. That creates a certain kind of unbuttoned intimacy. But that doesn't mean we've got to dumb ourselves down. We can still be as simple or as complex as the subject and our needs require us to be. There's no problem with that. Just because we're sitting talking in bed is not a reason to dumb down. And a lot of fearful politicians think that they either need to just turn their back on populist communication, or that it needs to be black and white and simplistic. And that's just not the case. Why is that not the case? It's not the case because the reason we need to do more kitchen talk, table talk now, is because we have a crisis of trust. What restores trust? Directness, transparency, authenticity. Simplicity on a subject matter that requires complexity doesn't necessarily restore trust. So, for goodness sake, it's important for us to model that to our politicians, because they're running scared and they're either running away from populist ways of communicating, or they're doing them in a sort of really unlovely and dumbed down way. First point. The second point here probably is that there is an extension from what we've just said. And that's that you probably need a different way today to talk about ambiguity, or strategic ambiguity, if that is indeed your foreign policy position. And that means that in 1998, in response to a topic coming up about a foreign policy position where the United States wanted to be strategically ambiguous, you'd probably just be covered by the fact that the journalist asking the question knows about this, that the public also is partly on board, and that all the politician needs to do is give an ambiguous answer with a kind of wink. Our policy is what we've always said it is. Or we're very clear about our policy and you can find out about it here. Or we're very clear that we're going to stand with country X. Does that mean that you're going to use military force to defend them or not? We're very clear that we're going to stand with them. Okay, what does stand mean? Well, that's enough. That's 1998. Today, that's not enough. So if AOC wanted to adopt a position of strategic ambiguity here, she would actually need to welcome the citizen in and say, you know what? Historically, the US position has been that we're not going to say out loud that we'll get militarily involved, but we're also not going to say out loud that we won't get militarily involved. If we say ahead of time that we won't, it actually weakens us for reasons X, Y, Z. And if we say that we will, it actually escalates tensions with China in a way that doesn't serve our interests for reasons X, Y, Z. So because of that, we're going to continue with that position. Right? So instead of fudging it in the 1998 wink-wink way, you have to be more open. Guys, yeah, we are actually being ambiguous. Yeah, that's why, and that's why it's good for us, and that's why we're going to continue doing that. If that's your answer, if that's the answer you want to give. And then you just give that decisively and authoritatively, and with that unbuttoned warmth whereby you say, come in round the corner, I'll explain to you what's going on. Then there is a kind of collective responsibility problem that I think arises here for the left in general, whatever you mean by the left. There isn't much left in the United States, quite frankly, but there is a certain kind of expression of social democratic sentiment on the American center left, if you like, which would be represented by AOC, Bernie Sanders. And that's that folks in that political camp need to train themselves up, even if they are never going to think about running for president, to say clearly what their position is on key foreign policy issues. So if you're Gavin Newsom, you now have to have very, very clear answers to questions like these. Why do you need that if you're never going to run? It's because the center-left, let's call it that for a moment, has a not entirely unjustified reputation of being good on domestic policy and bad on foreign policy. Also, you've got to educate your demographic on foreign policy, because the chances are they're much more informed about domestic policy. And actually, the way a lot of my friends and colleagues on YouTube work represents this quite well. In other words, a lot of the American political coverage platforms on YouTube are much stronger on domestic policy than they are in foreign policy. Whatever you think of what they're saying, whether you think it's agreeable or not, you often run into a situation where, I don't know, Kyle from Secular Talk or Breaking Points or whoever you think of, are clearly running out of steam when they're talking about foreign policy issues. They know about 5% about them relative to domestic issues that they're talking about. So that's important. So it's important for the left to train itself into just being organic on foreign policy issues and also being particular on foreign policy issues. You can't just take Taiwan or Ukraine and stick a sort of a generic position onto it about how war has got to be a last resort or something like that. And then personally about AOC. AOC is not socially fake in the way that Kamala Harris is. And that's unfortunate for Kamala Harris because she's indeed more likable privately than her public persona suggests. However, AOC hugely triggers insecure heterosexual men. That's just a fact. No, it's not a fact, it's an interpretation, but it's a blunt reality that that interpretation is true. A tempting answer of a very depoliticized sort is to say, well, it's their problem. And that's just not a political answer, because if you say that you're going to disregard more pathological positions among the citizenry, you're going to really model politics on some kind of idea of rational, idealized rational engagement, and that's going to mean you're going to lose, basically. So if you disregard pathological responses that you could do something about just because they you feel they're not quite valid, that's basically a path to political defeat, and it's been rather the way a lot of the identity politics engagement in the liberal center of Western politics recently has proceeded. It's been very damaging. So what the hell do you do about this? I think that we probably need a separate video about what you would do if you were AOC. The answer 9 times out of 10 is actually not to change, but to be you even more, while adding some commentary about why you are the way you are, rather than another way. Also, if there is a bit of a gap between your internal authenticity and something that people might find grating on your voice, in your tone, and you're not going to evolve that, then you need to be articulate about that by clearly saying, that's not me, right? I am authentic, I am open, I'm not telling people to wise up or what to do all the time, even if sometimes some people perceive that in my tone of voice because I speak like I speak. So, partly here, you're not going to be able to do anything about it if you're AOC, but partly you have to explore how you can lean more into a projection of social confidence that appeals to people who don't like you. It's work that she's going to have to do because she's currently too triggering to significant segments of the population. Luckily, in the populist age, that's actually easier to solve than you might think, because in the populist age, we can always do what we couldn't do in 1998, and that's to say, look, this is you and me. This is what I'm about. I'm telling you now. It's straight between us. You can see me, you can hear me. This is unfiltered stuff. This is who I am, right? You can trust this. You can really trust this, okay? You can do that. You can sort of tear down the fabrics that separate you from your electorate in a way you couldn't before. So that's my reaction. We have to keep talking developmentally about our politicians because they need to adjust to new political realities that are scary, not just for us, but also for them. Let's love and talk soon.